Today what I'd like to show you is a combination of techniques, and I've had a few requests for best combinations and how I see combinations. I think obviously we have our principal techniques of graduation, of lines, of layering, and there are so many ways that we can apply those three techniques. Seems almost infinite, and then when you multiply that by mixing them with the other techniques, by combining, I guess the selection is almost endless. So it's hard to sort of pick out one particular thing that is above all others and a better technique than anything else. So what I've done is I've chosen a technique that I guess I like to work with. I always enjoy working with this particular approach. And it starts by building structure into a shape and then working through the silhouette, through the shape, if you will, the form of the shape, and then by softening off the shape a little bit. So what we've got is three different panels in the haircut. So they're very simple panels. So one panel works from ear all the way through to ear. Another one works from the recession area along the corner of the head all the way around to the other side. So very symmetrical, ear to ear, and then recession area along the corner of the head, the round of the head, through the crown to the other side. What we're going to work with here is some graduation through here. So we're going to start to use this panel to develop the shape, so to start to build weight. I'm going to use this panel then to flatten the shape off, so I don't have a huge amount of width in the shape. It's going to be quite a slim shape, but still with lots of a nice head form at the back. And then finally I'll use that top panel there to be much looser and softer, so we get a bit more movement through what is otherwise kind of quite a short shape. So that shorter shapes obviously can be a little bit more static. They don't move as much as longer lengths. They don't have the weight or the length. So the top, keeping that disconnected, is going to allow and provide us with a little bit more softness and a bit more freedom within the shape, okay? So I'm going to start the shape in this Nape panel, so this panel that exists from ear to ear, and I'm going to work with vertical sections in this zone. So I'm going to start at centre back and start to build up a little graduated shape. Now you don't have to start at centre back, you could always start behind the ears, so depending on the shape that you want to create, you could maybe start behind the ears, and maybe instead of using a triangular graduation as I'm using, you could maybe use a round graduation. That's going to work just as well. It's all about the shape you want to create, the place where you want to put the weight. So as always with our work, it's always about suitability, so it's always about getting the weight in the right places. And that's a topic that's also cropped up, is how do we choose the right weight placement? Well, I think if we go back to our sort of fundamentals, we're always trying to pick out lengths that are suitable for somebody, we'll pick out a flattering length on the face. And it's the same for weight placement, wherever we want to emphasize and certainly add width to the shape, that's where we're going to look to put the weight. And similarly, to reduce the weight, we need to think about the shape that we're creating and where the effect that narrowing has on the face. And we pick out those places quite purposefully where we want to reduce the volume close to the face, and obviously where we want to increase the volume as well, where the weight placement is. So I guess there's no hard and fast rule, there's no 100% rule, but just that whole idea of suitability. And I always really believe in trying to, create the shape with your hands or with the hair itself, so we understand what the shape might look like in the end. So, pushing the hair around and during the consultation, forming the shape to get an idea of what looks good and what doesn't look so good. So far I'm just working on base, So that means just pulling the hair straight out from the head. I'm directing the hair down and back, just here, building up this graduated shape, so building up the weight, sitting the shape in towards the nape. As I come through into behind the ear, I'm going to use a tiny bit of over direction. So I'm going to over direct back onto my previous section for the last maybe 2-3 sections just behind that ear. And the reason I'm doing that is so I can just maintain some hair in this area here. Don't end up with a big gap right behind the ear. Obviously the hairline on a mannequin is somewhat different to that on a real person. So I'm sort of making a slight allowance because it's a mannequin as well, so always, I guess, trying to work with what we've got, whether that be a client or a mannequin. Okay, so I've got my little graduated shape. I'm going to just do a quick cross check, just see if I'm all on track. It felt okay as I was working through, but always good to verify that everything's as it should be before we move on. So I'm all good with that. So I'm going to work into the other side now. And again, I'll try and take this section so you can see it. And you can see the elevation. Just directing the hair back from its own base. So I'm going to step around the other side now so you can see that. Bring you in a little bit closer there. So I hope you forgive the fact that the videos aren't quite as slick as maybe they usually are. Obviously I'm doing this on my own in the basement of 4 Charlotte Place. London's a very quiet place at the moment. Not many people on the street at all, as it should be. Everybody trying to keep their distance. So I have the place all to myself. Just me, the mannequin, and you guys. Okay, so I'm working back to this point at the round of the head. I'm going to make my section slightly diagonal here. Just makes it easier for me to get my hand in and to work through to the last few sections behind the ear, where I will start to incorporate a little bit of over direction. My last section, over directed back onto the base of the previous, and there we have it. So again, let's do a little cross-checking. Everything looking fine, I'm happy to say. Going to check for symmetry, and I'm actually a tiny bit longer on this left hand side, so I'm going to work through that again. Stand on this side, tip the head to the side as well, just to allow me a little bit more access in there, make it easy for my hand. think what I did was just over-directed a little bit more on this side than I did on the first side. So going back through, just verifying the over-direction, making sure I'm not pulling back any further than just the base of the previous section. And that should give me enough extra length behind that ear just to fill that gap out comfortably. Let's have another little look. Check for symmetry. Almost there. All looking good. Of course, cross-checking, pulling the hair to the same place it was cut in, but just using a different sectioning pattern, usually the opposite one. Okay, so I have my graduated shape there through the nape. You can see that nice little build-up of weight we've got through here. And if we turn to the side, you should be able to see that build-up sitting into the neck. So my plan is now to work through this next panel, this middle panel, and rather than work with that triangular shape we worked with previously, I'm going to come and work with a square shape, so a layered shape. So we're moving from graduation into layering in this panel. I'm going to use the previous panel as a guide here, and then work that quite flat. So my weight placement should stay pretty similar, but just start to slim the shape out, particularly, and I'm interested in that particularly as we come through into the sides. That's where I want to see that narrow shape, slim shape. So I'm going to turn, let's come to here so you can see centre back. Actually, let's do this side first. So, with the head in an upright position, natural upright position, let's introduce this middle panel. And again, same vertical sections, but this time I'm using that length we have at the top of the previous panel here as my guide for panel number 2. But this time keeping my fingers nice and square. So thereby flattening the shape out a little bit. A more minimal silhouette. So in terms of where I'm pulling the hair to, you can see I'm pulling the hair straight, sort of square from the head. But I'm using the same direction that I pulled the previous sections in, so working straight out on base, and I will do that until I get to just past the round of the head again, and from that point I'll work with a little bit of over direction on each section, just as I did on the underneath, so mirroring the underneath. Finding my guide. Doesn't matter if I begin to disconnect a fraction, I can always come back through. There you can see I have done there. I can always come back through with that angle on the underneath and check that in. I'm not worried about that too much. Working with that little bit of over direction just behind the ear here to connect, but keeping things very much flat and square. I'll work like this now all the way through to the front. And once I'm reached the ear, I'm just reverting back to being on base. There's no over direction now. Turn back here so maybe you can see. Actually, just going to lower the camera a tiny bit. If I turn my hand this way, that's also a good hand position for creating that nice flat square line. And once I've reached the front, let's work with some cross-checking once again. Should be seeing something nice and square. All good. Turn this way so you can see the elevation. So exactly the same elevation, nice and square. Cross-checking all the way through that panel. So the back included. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that on the other side. I'll speed things up on this side, but I'm going to work exactly the same. It's a symmetrical shape, so no difference when I come through on the other side, the left-hand side. Okay, so with our two panels done and our base shape in place, our graduation and our layering through the centre, we're going to start to have a little look at the outlines. I don't want to cut this panel until the hair's dry, so I want to finish off these first two panels and get the base of the shape finished before I start to think about the top. So the first place I'm going to start is around the temple area around here, really important area, and perhaps an area that's a little bit overlooked, I think. I think when we think about outlines, we quite often consider, yes, of course, the sides and the back, but not often do we give quite so much consideration to that shape around the face. And for me, I think that's a really important area because that's a part of the frame for the face. So that's something I want us to just spend a little time looking at. So I'm going to start on this side, and I'm going to start with a slightly diagonal section that runs around the temple area here. So almost pretty much parallel to the hairline, I guess. And what I'm looking for is to over-direct the hair forwards a little bit, potentially keep the length at the bottom, but just reduce that length slightly through the top. So I'm over-directing fairly strongly forwards on that first section there. And then as I work back with subsequent sections, I'll maintain some over-direction so that these lengths eventually will blend with the previously cut hair after 2 or 3 sections. And what that's going to do is effectively it's going to round the shape in towards the face, so we have a little less bulk, a little less mass around this zone around the eye and the cheekbone area. So fundamentally the shape kind of rounds into the face a little bit. So with our layering in place, I can start to think about the shape of the outline. I'm going to use the brow bone as a little reference. And I'm going to cut a curving line down to a point where pretty much the corner of the eye meets the cheekbone. And anybody that has taken classes with me will know that's an area I tend to focus on a lot. I really believe it's an area that can add lots of positives to the face. So if we can create the right frame around the eye socket and develop the cheekbone area, then that's a real positive. So once within the temple area, I can start to look at the side. Obviously it's a mannequin, so the hairline here is super strong. Humans, we don't have such strength in the hairline, in the perimeter of the head, in the perimeter of the hair, and we certainly don't have such a kind of an obvious structured shape like that. So we always get a bit of a bizarre outline in the sides as it is. But I'm going to pick my length. I'm going to pick out maybe like the cheekbone. Something like that. Obviously again it's a mannequin, so features are a little bit ambiguous. So working through below the ear, making sure I haven't got too much tension there. I think for the moment that's going to do nicely. So let's go through, we're going to do the same on the other side. We'll over direct that hair forwards to start with, and then work the perimeter in. Okay, so with the sides and the temple areas refined, let's have a little look at the back. So again, I'm going to use the points of the scissors, as I have done through the sides, to maintain a slightly sort of softer, more serrated edge. And I'm almost extending that line I have in the sides through into the back. Of course, there'll be time to further refine this once the hair's dry, and I guess we have a little bit more information. But nice to get a basic shape in there, so I can start to understand and think about the balance and how we can use the top to further enhance the shape. Just lose my last little corner there, and the nape. And then the next thing I'm going to do with the outline there or thereabouts, I'm going to blow dry. So dry the shape all the way through. First thing I'm going to do though is damp this separation down there. That's had time to dry in, so obviously we're going to get some difference in the root movement there, so I need to eliminate that. A nice wrap dry all the way through, and then we can start to think about refining, pointing through the underneath and the freehand through the top. So with the blow dry done, just using primer, again, just keep the hair nice and natural and light, a very sort of weightless feel to it. A wrap dry with the primer all the way through, and then I used some Silk Smooth through the hair before I ironed. And I chose to iron the hair because we're going to do some freehand. I think it's advantageous to see the hair in as much of an even texture as possible. So that's my thinking there. So we've got this beautiful, shiny, consistent texture. Before we get on to cutting the top, I'm going to do a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to work through the underneath and point into the underneath just to soften this off. Again, just so the shape collapses a little bit, makes it a little bit smaller, a bit more minimal. And then I'll have a look at the outlines finally and get those all exactly as I want them before we do the final step, which is that top, which we're going to do with a freehand technique. So first of all, I'm going to work through the underneath and do some pointing. Again, if you've ever done any training with me, you'll know I'm very passionate about the way I think pointing should be done. And I would never, I should never say never really, but I would never really take sections in line with the fall of the hair. So like I'd never take a vertical section here to point into it. I'm always going to work with a horizontal section that was across the natural fall of the hair. So that when we point into the hair, as the sections come down, the hair on top tends to fill in those gaps, and we get a much softer effect. We still get lots of texture, the same amount of texture, but we're not punching holes into the shape, which we tend to do when we're working with a vertical section. We tend to point in here and we make this very kind of broken surface on the hair. Similarly, as well as the hair bends, when I'm using a pointing technique, as the hair bends and I've got a horizontal section, it's bending in a straight line. So my scissors are straight and they can work in to the hair as deep as I want them to without compromising the structure, the integrity of the shape. If I take a vertical section, I try and point deeply into that. The hair bends, as you can see. My scissors are straight, so I'm always going to be compromising the structure of the shape. So I'm always going to lose some of that shape we've spent a long time building up. So that's another reason that I don't use those vertical sections. So I'm going to work all the way through using horizontal sections. I'm pointing into the ends, maybe the last third of the hair, and I'm going to remove about 30% of the weight all the way through those two panels that I've cut already. Okay. So section by section, try not to pick the previous section up again. And try and take as much care over this part of the technique as I did the initial cutting phase. So looking down, I'm working over the top of the shape so I can look down onto each section, meaning I can see the angle that my scissors go into the hair, make sure I'm not cutting across the hair and creating a new silhouette, a new structure. I'm just merely softening the structure we've created. So I'll work through like that in little strips, as you can see, little bands all the way through the hair. Once I'm done, I'll have a little look over through the outline as well. Again, using the points of the scissors, but just to refine it and trying to perfect the shape before we do that final panel. Okay, so that's our finished shape. So we have a structure that is developed from graduation through the underneath, so working from ear to ear to develop that little triangular graduation, working through the sides with a much flatter shape, so a squarer angle internally to slim the shape off, and then through the top we've got those longer disconnected lengths that hang over the shorter hair and gives us this really kind of soft modern movement to the hair. So it's a very flexible shape. You could wear this, wear it back away from the face. You could do different shapes in the fringe, adapt it to different lengths as well. But I think the essence is that we've got this structure through the underneath that's then contrasted and complemented by this very sort of soft, fluid shape through the top. Okay, so I hope you like that, and I'll see you next time. Okay.